This week on BSD Now, we're going to be talking to Diane Bruce about using it for ham radio enthusiasts, the Raspberry Pi 3, and much more. That plus all the latest news from the week, so stick around for your place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 158, Ham, Radio, and Pi. Oh my. Recorded September 7th, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting episode. Glad to be back. I know I was gone last week at VMworld down in Vegas, which was fun but busy. That's a huge conference, like 35,000, I think, is what I heard for this year's number. Which, yeah, it's nuts, right? That's a lot of talking to people and standing at the booth and whatnot. So keeps you busy. But anyway, it's good. Very glad to be back, though. Looking forward to the next thing, which is Meet BSD here soon. Although I think you're doing,
yes.
Let's see, OpenZFS conference or not? No, you're doing Euro.
Yes, I'm doing Euro, which is in like 2 weeks now. And then, yeah, because it doesn't end until Sunday night, and the OpenZFS conference starts that Monday morning. There's no way for me to be in both of those places at the same time.
I'm telling you, VR conference tickets is the way to go. Eventually, we'll have our headset and just virtually attend. It'll be great.
Oh, yeah.
Matrix.
I will get to go to so many more conferences then.
Yeah, we won't get any work done, though. That may not be a good thing. So, anyway, well, of course, we're looking forward to all that. Of course, if you're going to be at Euro, come by and say hi to Alan. If you're going to make it to Meet BSD, you have to come by and see both of us. I guess that'll be a fun one as well. But we need to get into the headlines here. We got some stuff to talk about. So if you've been watching the show for the past few months, you've probably heard me dropping little hints about the upcoming rename of PCBSD and TrueOS. And, we're taking our time announcing that. But we've pretty much made that more official now. We're asking folks to test out the software before a wider announcement this fall. So we consider this like a soft launch. So we have a link to the blog post where we talked about this. But I'll just kind of recap some of it here for you. So for those who've been wondering about the name change, it's actually been something we've discussed over the past few years. I think even going back 5 years ago, it had come up at one point, and we've discussed it. But with us beginning to move more aggressively with changes for 11.0 and eventually what became 12 current, the time just kind of seemed right, since we had just kind of changed everything. And not only that, we've changed software development release model. If we're going to do a rebrand, this was the time to do it. So we have gone ahead and done that now. But discussing more about this in detail, I'm going to be giving a talk at Meet BSD 2016. So if you're going to be out there in person, you'll get to see it. Although I hope that gets recorded as well for those who can't attend. But here's some of the highlights we're going to be going over. So first of all, one of the differences with TrueOS versus PCBSD is we're no longer tied to specific FreeBSD point releases. So in the past, PCBSD 10.3 would come out, say, the same day or within a day or two of FreeBSD 10.3, and that's what it was based off of. So TrueOS instead is taking a little bit different path and is going to follow the rolling release model based upon FreeBSD current. So if you grab it right now, don't be shocked when you see it says 12.0-current in your uname. No, that's not a mistake. That is correct. And part of the reason for doing that was when we were doing the 11.0 release cycle about 3-4 months ago, we just ran into things where it's like I bought a brand new Carbon from Lenovo and the Wi-Fi wasn't supported. That was in current and wasn't going to make it into 11.0. So already it's like, we haven't even released yet, and I'm already like, I wish I had support for this hardware, and we wanted to get away from that.
Well, in particular, when the support is already committed and you just can't have it. It's like,
You just can't have it yet, right? It's like, okay, well, you can wait 6 months, or, depending on what type of support it is, you can wait 2-3 years if it's going to be in a .0, like if it's not going to get backported to stable. So I was just like, you know what? I'm sick of that. I want the FreeBSD, or I guess the TrueOS experience to be different, where it's like, I just bought this hardware, the support landed, 2 weeks ago, great, I can have it now. Like I don't have to wait to get my Wi-Fi going. So that was the big motivation behind wanting to move to a rolling release model. So at the moment, that currently looks like about every 2 weeks we're pushing out a new release, which includes a new FreeBSD world, kernel, and packages to go with it, which has been working out pretty well. We've been doing it internally for about 3 months now and have written a bunch of special tooling to handle that. And of course, features such as boot environments finally make this a feasible option. In the early days of PCBSD, FreeBSD, this is something I wouldn't have dreamed of, right? We didn't even have package at the time. We didn't have ZFS. We didn't have boot environments. So something like that would have been very risky to do. Nowadays, not a big deal. If the update fails, you roll back your boot environment, you send a bug report. We even have a self-updating updater now. So during the debugging of that, I can put a new update manager out, and you can just continue to update as you normally would once the bug has been resolved. So it's not even as difficult to fix update problems as it used to be. So all things considered, I'm really enjoying the rolling release model, and it's been nice to have like all my systems in sync and constantly updated. In addition to some of those changes, though, TrueOS does things differently than vanilla FreeBSD as well. We've started pulling in a lot of things from different places. So specifically, though, we've pulled in Matt Macy's DRM work and the Linux compat work because obviously we're a workstation and we want graphics to work. Turns out X and drivers are important to us. So we're pulling that stuff in, which hasn't even landed all in FreeBSD head yet. Other stuff we've pulled in is Bernard Spill, who we've interviewed here before as well, has imported LibreSSL directly into base. So if you do install TrueOS and do package info, you won't see LibreSSL, but if you run OpenSSL-version, you'll see it's LibreSSL 242, I believe, is what it's running right now. So the latest stuff, and it's just directly in base. And another thing we're working on for this next week's release is we're switching to building from an external toolchain. So Clang's not even in the base system anymore. We now build from the Clang from ports, which is LLVM 3.8 at the moment, and that fixes some things like OpenMP support being enabled for packages that build with it, etc. So again, we're doing a little bit of things differently. It's still FreeBSD though, and no, we're not forking or anything like that because this is all stuff we hope eventually will land in FreeBSD in some form or another. I don't anticipate them switching to LibreSSL in the base, but hopefully Bernard's options will be there, so at least the support's there for it. And we just happen to build with those flags on versus vanilla FreeBSD not. So that's kind of where we're at with it. Of course, there's a whole bunch of tooling that's been placed. We're in the process of replacing the legacy control panel with the new SysADM stuff, which I've talked about in the past, which is another Qt GUI that lets you do remote driving around of your TrueOS desktop or server with either WebSockets or REST APIs as well. So again, just a lot of stuff has changed, and I'm going to be talking about more of these things as the next couple months unfold here, and of course when I kind of give the official presentation at Meet BSD. But for the moment, we are asking people to go ahead and feel free to test it. Let us have feedback while we're working and fixing bugs and testing, getting us towards a more stable release. Like I think this last week we found an issue where sometimes one package repo updated and the other didn't, and that screwed up the updater. So I fixed that last night. Like little things like that still need to be sorted out, but it's getting pretty good. And again, we're running a whole office on it here at this point. We have been now for about 2-3 months. So it seems to be working out, and of course we welcome your feedback. And take a look at the website. We have a Gitter channel if you want to chat with us. That's a Slack-like thing if you're not an IRC fan, and also Reddit. We officially support that as well. So get in touch with us on those various social media avenues.
So the chat room asks for more explanation on changing the name.
Oh, on changing the name. Okay, so PCBSD. It's a really long acronym, right? And we've also been using the name TrueOS for a while. So if you've installed PCBSD anytime in the last 5 years, you've seen on the selection screen, it'll say PCBSD Desktop or TrueOS Server, right? So we've already kind of been using both. But we wanted to unify on one. But unfortunately, PCBSD is a terrible name for a server.
Well, especially technically your name is PC-BSD, right? Too?
Yes. Yes. And it's also a recognition of it's a different world today. I'm envisioning a day when we have ARM versions of TrueOS, right? And PCBSD doesn't really say ARM to me, or doesn't scream ARM, right?
There's definitely that.
There's definitely that. So again, the TrueOS name allows us to do things in a more generic way where we could have a TrueOS embedded or a TrueOS ARM or server or workstation or various TrueOS targeted things that, again, PCBSD maybe doesn't really scream that. Plus, it's a mouthful. Yeah, how many people, I've been to so many trade shows, are like, what does that even mean? Maybe they've not even heard of the words BSD. That's an acronym in and of itself. And then you throw PC on that, and it's just this mess of letters. And I know for years, even my folks couldn't remember what it was called. So it was time for something. TrueOS is easy to remember.
And then, when you compare it, there's like PC Linux OS. I'm like, well, that's a kind of a lame name, isn't it? And then you realize PCBSD basically means the same thing, right?
It's exactly the same thing, right? So, and I know some people were kind of a little concerned that we dropped BSD out of the name. And so no, it has nothing to do with hating on BSD or anything. It's just a reflection of we wanted something that's a little less.
In particular, it's the type of people that need to be able to remember the name, don't know what BSD is. And so sticking 3 random letters in there doesn't help them.
It doesn't really help them in any case. But if they go, now true operator, okay, I can remember that. Yes. That makes sense. And it was the least radical name change we could have made since, again, we already owned all the TrueOS stuff and we're using it.
Because it's not the name I recommended after we had our discussion with Alfred where he complained about the name PCBSD, and then like a week later you started this whole rename to TrueOS thing.
Yep. Well, we kicked around a bunch of names internally. We had some good ones, but at the end we were like, we kind of like TrueOS, and it already has been in use and stuff. So
where did mine come on the ranking there?
Yours was second. But so the TrueOS thing also works because again we're all iX people who work on this for the most part. But a lot of us are, and we have TrueNAS and FreeNAS. So it kind of fit in with that whole family of naming. So I was like, okay, I like that. Like I'm cool with that. But again, it's all open source. It's still BSD licensed. So nothing has changed as far as that goes. We're all still on GitHub, and hopefully it'll get better than ever is what we're looking at. Because it already seems to be. I'm already doing far more stuff on TrueOS than I ever did on
I really
BSD.
liked the... I put it on both of my laptops right before a conference, which is kind of a risky thing to do. Although it was slightly easier now because I could install to my existing zpool. So I basically installed TrueOS 12 in a new boot environment on my old PCBSD 10 that had been hacked and cobbled to actually be FreeBSD 11 and had other terrible things done to it. So just a fresh boot environment, and it was all clean.
And you can do a bmin mount and then go grab your changes. Yep. Like, for example, I had my OpenVPN config on an old boot environment. So I just mounted, grabbed it. Okay, I'm done. And then once you've moved stuff over, you can nuke that old boot environment when you're comfortable. So that's the upgrade path for those wondering who are still on PCBSD and want to switch. You'll install into a boot environment, cherry pick the files out you want from your old boot environments, and then you're good to go. So it just works. And speaking of, I put that feature into FreeNAS not too long ago too, just this last week. So FreeNAS will allow you to do that here soon too, so you don't have to blow away your boot pool. But anyway, that's for another day. Anyway, I'm not going to mention all the other names we consider because it'll make you guys start arguing about, you should have picked this or that.
Yeah, we should not do that.
TrueOS, deal with it. We've already registered the name and set up the site, done everything.
Yes, you already built a new website and got the logo and...
That's right. Anyway, but we'll talk more about that in the future. And of course, when I give the talk at Meet BSD, talking about some of the details and whatnot, you'll get to hear more about what the plan is going forward. And I think that's when we'll do like the hard launch and do a press release and all that. And hopefully at that point, it's solid enough where I feel like telling people, okay, now it's time to migrate from PCBSD. Everybody
already did.
See, there you go. I know a lot of us already have, but for mere mortals, Alan, I must admit you're slightly above, what people would consider a mere mortal computer user. But for everyone else who doesn't want all the bugs or whatever, give us a couple months and then we'll go ahead and tell you.
I haven't upgraded the machines of the other people at my office yet.
Okay,
but eventually we'll have to do that.
You'll have to do that. We've done a lot of work, too, to make 4K a thing, too. Like 4K work really well.
All the machines in our office are dual monitor 1080p.
Okay. Well, then you won't care so much. But in PCDM now, you can even choose the DPI. Mm-hmm. So if you have a 3K or 4K, like my Carbon is 3K, then I can set a DPI for that, and then that sets it for your desktop when you log in, which is kind of cool.
So you can take your 3K screen and make it look like my 1080p screen?
Correct.
Just slightly smoother edges.
The smoother edges makes things bigger so you can read them. You don't have this teeny tiny little fonts. So we're just doing a lot of work to make those things just work. Mm-hmm. And I've been very pleased with the results. So anywho, and we did give a sneak peek at a Knox bug last week. We'll mention that in the BSD bits a little later. So we'll get to that. Getting there.
Yes. So next story.
We should move on to our next story. Okay, so the voicemail scammers that never got past our OpenBSD gray listing. So Peter Hanstein, also known as the grumpy BSD guy, has given us an interesting look at how their OpenBSD gray listing prevented spam from ever making it to their inbox in the first place. So he's looking at a specific case that looks like it occurred during August 23rd and the 24th. There was a particularly nasty ransomware payload going around that was a zip file with JavaScript and whatnot, which was supposed to do really bad things to Windows systems, right? So Peter then walks us through how the 3-mail server setup was done and how spamd is run on each of them, giving gray listing mode. And he said the results were nothing short of perfection. He said, from those sources, we can see that we had a total of 386 hosts that attempted delivery to a total of 396 hosts with target and targeted email pairs, which he annotated here in a CSV file if you want to see where they came from. He said the interesting part came when he started looking at the mail server logs to see how many had actually reached the content filtering or had even been passed on in the direction of the user's mailbox. He said there were none. The number of messages purportedly from voicemail which was the exploit spammer in this case. He said in any of the domains we handled that had made it even to the content filtering stage was 0. He said 0, not a single one made it even to content filtering. So they didn't even bother checking the zip. It had already been gray listed and nuked. Not bad at all. Looks like in this case, though, spam trap addresses plus gray listing is the way to go for stopping this kind of foolishness. So I highly recommend you, if you're an IT guy, you run a mail server, check out his blog post for more details, and perhaps this will encourage you to do a similar type of spam type setup with gray listing. And I mean, if you can stop stuff before it even gets to the content filtering, that just makes it harder for the bad guys to get any of this kind of crap through to your inbox. So definitely a good one to hear.
Yeah, he has actually an update to the post here where he talks about the current thing. They've given up on fake voicemails. They're now doing fake document scans from your Xerox and so on. And so he talks a bit about he's working on addressing that one as well.
Nice. Okay. Well, so it looks like next up we have Adrian Chad has a blog post about tiny systems.
Right.
So you wrote the notes. So now, what is he doing?
So he's basically raising the questions, what could FreeBSD do better to work on these tiny systems? Right? If you're looking with a little MIPS board or something and it's only got 32 megs of RAM, you need a lighter based system. So he says some of the stuff you can do now on FreeBSD, but it's more work than it should be. Or it's like, well, you can cobble it together with a bunch of shell scripts, but it'd be nice if those were either already provided for you or were even nicer framework or whatever. So he says the first one is the lack of a real service management daemon of some kind. FreeBSD doesn't have service management. It has the framework assumes that each daemon will implement its own backgrounding and monitoring and making sure it does the right thing. He said it'd be nicer if init or something similar to init could manage services and start and restart them where appropriate. I know in his secret repo that he won't share with me, Baptiste has the start of something that would run as PID2. Basically, init would start this, and this would take care of actually starting anything that's a service, and would notice when that service stopped running and could start it again, or
we
log
need to
an
keep
event.
alive.
Yeah.
Keep alive flag. Come on.
Well, Edward Naparala, I think it was Traz at FreeBSD, has been working on a framework for rc.conf, rc.d that does just the daemon command on more things that will auto restart so that it'll keep them running if they do crash. So you just add, whatever underscore daemonize equals yes in rc.conf, and it will add that a bit of extra stuff. But that's probably not exactly what Adrian's looking for in this particular case, because that's adding an extra binary in front of each binary that takes a little bit of memory. And when you only have 32 megabytes, what you consider a little bit of memory is a lot different than what I consider that on my laptop with 8 gigabytes of RAM. So of course, on a system with 32 megabytes of RAM, anything like a service manager needs to be very lightweight. He says, maybe I also want to start telnetd or dropbear or sshd whenever a connection comes in, rather than having that daemon running all the time using up a bunch of RAM that you don't have to spare. He says, I'd also like to be able to add services for monitoring, such as DNSMask and host APD, or host APD, and so on, without having to do a bunch of extra stuff. So it's like telnetd and sshd could be run from something like inetd, but I know for SSH that requires a bunch of special support in the daemon. And while I think SSHD has that, I'm not sure if dropbear does. And at some point that would be useful. And then you hear all this talk about socket activation. It's like on my little plan in the back of my head, it's like it can't be that hard to do socket activation via inetd, right? Instead of listening on a port, you would just give it a path to a socket, and when somebody connected to that socket, it would fire off such and such a daemon
automatically and deliver the message.
Yeah. So the daemon would only be started when something actually tried to use it, and then when something was done using it, it would be off again and not taking up resources you don't need. He also talked about wanting to do things like, as soon as any network interface comes up, try to do NTP over it. by running NTP date because, most of these little embedded things don't have a clock. So when they're powered off, when they first power on, they don't know what time it is. Although Peter was talking about an interesting hack on older versions of FreeBSD, it would use the last modified or last mounted time of the file system when it was booting up. And it was like, okay, if I have no idea what time it is, I know it is at least when I was last unmounted my file system. And then when I run NTPD, I'm not 30 years out of date or 45 years out of date.
Right.
I'm only a couple of hours or days off instead. So
that's a good idea. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better than 1969 something.
Yeah, basically January 1st, 1970.
Yeah.
Although I was looking, ZFS could do the same thing, although obviously there's no code hooked up for that currently. He also says, the next is a lack of a suitable syslog daemon. So yes, I'd like to be able to log some messages locally on this machine, and then maybe have the rest go to the remote machine. Even if it's only a couple hundred kilobytes of messages. A lot of these things have very, very little storage, and or have read-only file systems, meaning that you're going to be logging into RAM. And so you don't want to keep more than say 60 kilobytes of logs or something. He said, I'd also like to be able to push to remote services. Unfortunately, the FreeBSD syslog daemon does not do log rotation or maximum log file size itself. Instead, that's done by new syslog, which is run out of cron. I think by default once an hour. At that point, it's like, well, on your embedded system with very, very limited storage, we could generate too many logs in an hour. And, you definitely don't want to be bogging down the CPU by running new syslog more frequently either. So what if syslog could detect when the log file's getting too big and either do something itself or just kick off new syslog for you?
Interesting. Okay.
I think they could be useful in a couple other places too, because currently, in new syslog, you say, if the log file gets over 100 kilobytes, do this. It's like, sure, but if it only runs once an hour, then what if the log file gets to 900 kilobytes before it's been an hour? Of course, in FreeBSD 12, I changed all the defaults to 1 megabyte because on most machines, 100 kilobytes of logs isn't very much, and most people have the space to spare. Plus, when they get compressed, you end up not using very much at all. Although a future update will offer you a blanket way to turn compression off on all the log files in the case where you're using ZFS, where it's actually really silly to read in this LZ4 compressed log file from the disk, decompress it in order to run it through xzip to compress it. Right? You'd be like, it's already compressed on the disk. Don't worry about it.
Leave it alone.
Yeah.
Stop touching it.
And then, syslog leaves much to be desired, especially if you've ever tried to play with his configuration syntax. It's like, what the hell is that? But also it has no filtering capabilities. Like, what if I could just say any message with this in it, throw it away, or make it go to this different file instead? So there's definitely a lot that can be done to improve syslog.
For sure.
Including maybe having it detect when its log file has gotten too large and fire off new syslog for you. And he says, yes, there's also the lack of a cron service. So while we have cron tab, that's something you have to keep running all the time. He said it'd be nice to have this integrated into the service management framework so things could be easily added and removed at runtime or whatever. Or even kind of maybe have type capability also scheduled in where you want to make a cron. Do this one time later, again, without having to keep yet another daemon running. So he says, well, he may end up just using cron. The problem is that cron uses about 1.3 megabytes of memory, and that's left running all the time. Plus, it's using up a bunch of CPU time every time it's checking. It's like, is it time to run something yet? Is it time to run something yet? And, it's usually never actually doing anything. So it's an easy thing to turn off until you end up needing it for that one thing. 1.3 megabytes is a lot when you only have 32 megs of RAM to work with. Yeah,
that's just to have it eaten up all the time. That's a waste.
It's just interesting to see we go full circle with computers here. I remember my first computer had 32 megabytes of RAM.
Yeah.
And now,
why are we worrying about this now?
My phone has 3 gigabytes.
Yeah, right.
But I have these little embedded boards with 64 megabytes of RAM, and it's like, wow, that's become all. And at the same time, we have people that want their system to still perform very well, but with 64 gigabytes of RAM. And it'll be interesting to see how the balancing act plays out, making sure that the code base is equally as useful on extremely small systems with 32 megabytes of RAM, extremely large systems with 2 terabytes of RAM, and my laptop all at the same time.
Yeah, one has to wonder if tuning's enough, or if at some point there'll be like another fork of like a mini BSD or something like that, where they take it and they just track FreeBSD, but then implement these changes to run them.
That's where we've seen, some people with going even smaller than 32 megabytes of RAM, going down to, the little PIC 32s and so on with only kilobytes of RAM, going back to BSD 2 or BSD 4 and
talk about starting over.
Light BSD and retro BSD, and starting with a really, really very stripped down basic BSD operating system, and then just adding some modern bits enough that you can run applications to support that kind of hardware.
Yeah.
But, in the particular case of Adrian and the embedded stuff, he really wants to, run a Wi-Fi access point, have DHCP and modern things, have modern N802.11n Wi-Fi, and be able to run SSH and things like that. Yes.
Okay, you got to tell me about this next one here. I saw the headline when you're writing the notes. So, losing a full disk encryption password is not fatal? What's happening here?
So this is a story from Filippo Valsorda, who's a crypto expert at Cloudflare, but he has OpenBSD on his laptop. He just set up OpenBSD on his laptop, and he did a nice soft RAID full disk encryption setup in OpenBSD, and he set his password, and then when he tried it again, it didn't work.
Oops.
Yeah, so at the end of the story, basically he says, it turns out I typoed one of the Italian words in my password, and so when he typed what he thought the password was, it didn't work. So he knew most of what the password was, but not exactly what the password was.
Sure.
So he set about building a tool to brute force the OpenBSD full disk encryption system. So he said his goal was to extract enough information from the encrypted disk and rebuild enough of the decryption algorithm by reading the source code of OpenBSD to be able to rapidly try many passphrases and brute force his password. So the post walks through how he reverse engineered the encryption system from the source, and from a hex dump he created a little memory disk and set up the OpenBSD full disk encryption on it with a password he knew, so that he could see what the metadata looked like and how to figure out what was what on the disk. So he starts off, he creates a little soft RAID here, and he tries to connect to his disk and gets incorrect password. So then he digs into the code and finds where the password prompt is, and then finds that it calls this function derive key from PKCS. And then he looks how that works, and he sees it passes in a salt, and then that's used along with a number of iterations to generate this PKCS v5 strengthened password. So basically it takes your password, runs it through a bunch of iterations of an algorithm to make a stronger key. So here he is creating the little fake memory device and setting it with the passphrase password, and then doing a hex dump on it, and then comparing that to the source code and finding the struct that actually gets written out to the disk, and finding all the different fields that belong, what's what on that thing. And from that, he manages to actually find his encrypted key and find the code that's used to decrypt it and the code that's used to verify it. So the key that you have for your thing in OpenBSD is encrypted with AES ECB, or Electronic Codebook 256, and then it uses a HMAC SHA-1 to verify that when you decrypt the key, that it's actually the right key. So that's how it tells if it's the right password. Because the thing with disk encryption is you can never, if you decrypt with the wrong password, you get random data. You don't actually get an error. And so, technically you could never figure out if you actually had the right password. And so this HMAC allows it to compare to a known value and tell if it's decrypted the correct, if you've inputted the right password, so you're actually decrypting the master key and not decrypting a bunch of gibberish that's not going to decrypt the drive. So after all that, he's got the stuff he needs here and writes a little, I think this is a Python or Go, a Go script to actually bulk decrypt. So he's basically extracted the encrypted secret key for his encrypted disk and put it into this little Go program. And it basically just brute forces from a set of passwords to try to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so he started... let it run and started cracking, and maybe his hopes weren't all that high because you are trying to brute force, but
Sure.
he did that. And then updater, he says later, I found it after fixing a bug or two in the brute force tool and almost losing hope. I found the right combination of the forgotten word and an Italian misspelling of it, and that was his passphrase, and he was able to decrypt his disk. He says after he did all the work, he found a nice article that describes and documents the entire OpenBSD disk encryption system. He says that would have been really useful to have. And also found references to the fact that John the Ripper, the password cracking program, might actually have a module for attempting to crack OpenBSD's full disk encryption already.
Interesting.
Then he went over to the OpenBSD tech mailing list and put up a post suggesting some changes to the way the full disk encryption works on OpenBSD. Currently, it does a fixed value of 8,000 rounds of the key derivation algorithm, which isn't very many. So he says...
Sure. Not today.
Well, I don't know if that was very many ever, actually. But anyway, he says... he assumed OpenBSD would pick a very robust default, or erring on the conservative side maybe, but not that low. He says maybe it's time to bump it up, or better yet, pick it based on a quick machine benchmark. That's actually what FreeBSD's Geli does. Rather than using some fixed number that would have to be updated every couple of years and cause problems, of course, you can, when you create Geli, you can specify the exact number you want. I don't know if you can for OpenBSDs or not, but the default in FreeBSD is that it does a benchmark of how long it takes to do the PKCS with so many iterations. And it tries again and again, and it keeps doing it until it takes more than 2 seconds. Or it keeps doubling the numbers it was doing until it eventually takes more than 2 seconds, and that's the number it keeps. Or the number it uses by default. So that means on my file server that I run FreeBSD on, and this is where I do all my development. So it's where I did this test, which is like an i5-3570. This is just a modest medium end processor. 2 seconds works out to be 975,845 rounds. So just shy of 1 million rounds instead of 8,000. That makes a little bit of a difference.
Yeah, that's quite a significant number difference.
Yeah. And so it looks like the OpenBSD people agree and will likely implement something very similar. Yeah,
I would imagine them changing that pretty quick.
It looks like it should be fairly simple. In particular, they mentioned that that's already what they do when they use bcrypt for the key derivation function. They do a micro benchmark to decide what's a good default.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, very cool. Well, hopefully that turns into a fix here landing relatively shortly, and that's amazing. I usually when you hear about somebody losing their key, that's it. But the fact he was able.
Well, in particular, when I looked at the math for it, it means that each try, because the key derivation function was 8,000 rounds, would take like 0.02 seconds, whereas with FreeBSDs, each try would take 2 seconds. Now, you can multi-thread that across all your processors and technically do more than one guess at once or something, but the work factor of 1 million versus 8,000, obviously you get an idea of how much more time it would take for each try if that number was higher.
Okay. Well, very cool. Well, thanks, Alan, for bringing us that story again. Fascinating.
Yeah, it was very interesting for me because I had done so much work with Geli recently and basically did very similar to him of reverse engineering and figuring out how the state works. Even though I had the code, eventually I had to get down to, okay, I'm trying to decrypt this and it's not decrypting. What am I doing wrong?
Sure.
And so I've got very familiar with that bit of code.
Nice. Okay, well, we're going to have an interview today, it looks like, with Diane Bruce here in a minute, so you want to stick around for that. But before we go over there, we need to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be iXsystems, of course, website for that, iXsystems.com/BSDNow. You want to go there right now and get in touch with those folks. I know we just got back from VMworld where they debuted their new iX rack, which is pretty much a rack of all iX gear. Think of it as your cloud replacement. So if you're spending a fortune on the cloud, you may want to take a look at iX Rack, see how much that can save you. Essentially, deploy your own cloud.
Yeah, so basically you get a rack, and in it you have a TrueOS for storage, a bunch of executors to run whatever virtualization you want, whether that's KVM or VMware or whatever.
Sure.
Because TrueOS storage is certified for VMware and Citrix and all the other ones.
Yeah, it's very good. So the nice thing is the rack's customizable. You call up and say, this is what I want in it. So maybe you don't want much storage. Maybe it's all computer. Maybe there's a lot of storage and a little compute. I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends on what your business case is. But of course, iX Rack, they're going to be able to do that for you. So definitely very good
the biggest
stuff.
problem with the cloud is your bandwidth between your office and the cloud is usually not very much. Whereas if it all lives on your premise, it can be a lot. Or even just your bandwidth between parts of the cloud. In the cloud, you usually can't get 40 gigabits between your storage and your compute. With iX Rack, it's just like, I want 40 gigabits. There, 40 gigabits.
Yeah, it's only going from here to here. We can do that. That's very cool. But of course, all their iX systems powered by the latest and greatest Intel processors. So if you need something new, something shiny, a specific model or variation of something, you get in touch with them. See what they can find for you. Usually they're pretty good about tracking those down. And of course, be sure to mention you heard about it here on BSD Now, because they like to hear from our listeners. I know when I was at the conference, a bunch of the sales guys I was with there, I talked to somebody who was watching your show just last week and blah, blah, blah. And it's so neat because I know I'm dealing with somebody who's more experienced and knows what they're doing. You know? It helps them gauge also like the client, like what level of expertise might they have. And well, let's talk about that. So definitely good stuff. And of course, we love to hear feedback. So if you've ordered something amazing, you'll have to send us pictures or give us details because we like to hear how that went.
I just started my Lewis order with them last night, actually. I need more video transcoding machines, and we're going to use NVIDIA GPUs this time. So it's like, well, we need a chassis that's 1U, but will fit this giant video card. It's like, so a motherboard where the SATA ports aren't going to poke up into the fan blades would be great. They're like, we're going to see what we can find for you.
Oh, that's going to be good stuff. Okay. Well, definitely keep us in touch with that, Alan. We want to know how that works out. Okay, we're joined now by Diane Bruce of FreeBSD fame, ham radio enthusiast, and much, much more. So first of all, welcome to the show today, Diane. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
So first time on, we have to do the usual stuff, which is we ask you to tell us about yourself. How did you first get into BSD? Because we like to hear how everyone's journey began.
It's kind of a long story.
Get started. Well, okay, break it down. Shorten it, but
I'll break
let
it
us
down
know.
short and sweet. I guess I was fascinated with Unix when I was first introduced to it in the 80s, early 80s.
Sure.
I was introduced to Unix, version 6 and then version 7, and always wanted one at home. And of course, I could never afford a PDP-11, though. Some people did bring home a PDP-11 home. I had to wait until the Unix port bill got that ported to non-proprietary, non-DEC equipment, and that's when I started getting interested.
Was that at your home or was that at school?
At home.
At home. Man, so you were on BSD before it was BSD, like before it was cool. That's
yes. I had a dabble in the other OS I won't mention.
Okay.
But I think everybody did.
A lot of us just gloss over that.
Chris has a past too.
Well, I'm sure.
There was a day when we did QBasic programming, and
I did that.
You did that too?
I never did Windows, surprisingly enough. I did something called OS. What was it? It was a 6809 OS, but it wasn't the Apple one, so it was OS/9.
Nice.
Which I always got confused with the Apple version, but it was a came out by Microware and was a very Unix-like a little operating system for 6809s, and then was ported to 68000s. So I used to get my hands on a 6809 system, and I had a 6809 running OS X OS 9 at home for a while before I got into BSD and.
I can see how that would be confusing because OS 9 and then OS 10 or X.
Yes, it's like this was OS/9, which is completely unrelated.
In fact, I was very surprised to see that there had been a lawsuit registered by Microware. Microware is now defunct, by the way, but they had sued Apple and lost in court. I wonder why you're a little company going after a big, huge company like Apple.
Why don't you ask SCO how that lawsuit against IBM? Oh, wait.
Yep.
It was quite amusing to see the SCO host names in the virtual machines, and it's somebody reporting a problem on the FreeBSD mailing list. Yeah, somebody from Zinus was having trouble with NFS, was it?
I was like, oh, yeah.
Yes, they were doing something and having trouble, and the host names were all, whatever, lab.sco.com.
I was like, wait, what? That's funny.
Yeah. So, Diane, what are some of the areas of FreeBSD that you've worked on, or what are some of the things we can blame you for?
Primarily ports. When previous jobs, I've been a little reluctant to get myself into the kernel stuff because there was some possibility of conflict. I actually worked for BSDI for a short time, and before we became Wind River. So some of the pieces of the kernel there, I would have been very reluctant to come straight from, try to work on FreeBSD or any other BSD at the same time. But ports, there was no such concern. So, and besides, we needed the ports, so that's what I started working on. Okay. So I worked on ports. I would like to work more on kernel stuff now that I'm. Not that when BSDI is long gone.
Sure.
And I've dabbled, sent in a few doc patches, but just poked my fingers in where I thought I could probably help a bit.
Any ports in particular that people would recognize that you maybe worked on?
Of course, the amateur radio ports primarily. Sure. All the amateur radio ports, but.
Well, see, that's perfect segue into the next question, which was I think you primarily involved amateur radio ports over there. So what got you into doing amateur radio in the first place?
As a kid, I was always fascinated by radio. We'd go for long drives on the Sundays, and the radio would be on, and there'd be all this music and voices coming from the car radio, and you go, hey, that's neat. How does that work? And it's just natural segue from that into, oh, you mean you can do this, build stuff, do it yourself? And it's just a natural segue. It just naturally came from listening to the car radio. Trust me. And you could talk back to them too, which was really cool. So some people, I guess, get into the broadcast side of it from that sort of interest, but I wanted to actually know how it worked. I still don't know, but I mean, what's an electromagnetic field? But I know the math. You just can't. It's still cool.
I remember my first Radio Shack little electronics kit, and it's like the experiment 130 something was. Broadcast over AM radio from the little kit, like you could only reach about halfway across the room to the family radio, where it's like, I'm on the radio, look at that.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. It's so cool. I think a lot of us have had this interest in radio, and I find that there's a synergy, like a combination. I think I'm sort of getting into the next question, but I think that's why there is this synergy, that we do have this common interest with electronics and radio and computers.
So you've been very active in the ham radio community, including working on the related ports and tools for FreeBSD. What's the current state of actually being able to do ham radio stuff with FreeBSD?
It's pretty good. A couple of ports need a little loving, but we're always looking for help. It's being a little tiring. We've had Stephen Sherd come on board lately. I helped mentor him, get him a port spit, and I'm hoping we get a few more porters. You don't actually have to be into a ham radio to be a porter, though, for ham radio ports, but it would be. I don't see why you wouldn't want to get a ham radio license after getting into the ports or doing that sort of thing. And Adrian, who you know from the Wi-Fi, all his Wi-Fi work has a ham radio license as well. So there's a few of us around. And I think the chief reason we've got to get a good core of work done on the ham radio ports is so we can reach and hopefully grab some of the technical interest from the amateur radio licensed engineers and technicians, and we need to grab that interest as well to get them to use ham radio professionally as well.
Yeah, I think it has to work well enough to get.
Right now, we're pretty good shape. We're pretty comparable to most of the other to the other BSDs and to Linux.
Well, I was going to ask about that. So are there any other things that would be needed? Like, again, I'm not an expert on ham radio by any means, but to use FreeBSD as a platform, are there drivers involved, things that have to be written so you can interface, or is it just a set of running some desktop type tools to do things? Like, are you actually interfacing with your ham radios in any way?
I've done a little bit of that, but fortunately, none of that really takes specialized drivers. It's done usually down serial ports, USB, Ethernet even.
Oh, okay.
Some of the hardcore devices hams are working on, such as the RF, hack RF, and the new radio devices, the USRP, are Ethernet or USB, depending on what kind of speed that you need to do.
Sure.
So,
All right, well, it sounds like it just kind of works.
Yeah, and I think it's important that the ham stuff actually has to be at least in a working state to get people interested. And as you get more people that are interested and maybe experts at the very ham side of it to use the platform, then we can convince them to help us maintain it and extend it more. Whereas if it doesn't actually work yet, then it's harder to get them interested in the first place.
I just got dropped.
Yep. We got you back.
What happened there?
Oh, well, me and Alan were talking. It sounds like things just kind of work, and that's good. So that's
good.
Yeah. So if someone were interested in maybe getting started with this type of things, is there like starter hardware that you would recommend, like specific devices, or?
No, just get on your normal hardware. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking here.
Well, I don't know much about it. Like you mentioned the hack RF and some of the hardware like that. Is there?
Yes. There's software-defined radio. If you, I'm going to plug my own article in the FreeBSD Foundation Journal.
There you go.
That's a good start. I would read that.
Okay.
That would probably give you a good overview of what kind of hardware and what kind of things you can do with ham radio combined with. Specifically in this case FreeBSD, but computers in general. I mean, if talking to the astronauts on board the ISS doesn't excite you, I don't know what will.
Yeah,
that is a good point. Yeah. That does sound really neat.
That's a good way to get younger people involved in wanting to play with ham radio and so on.
Like a kids group growing or something. Like, hey, we're going to talk to the astronaut. That's pretty cool.
That's right. It is pretty cool.
So, okay, well, that begs the question then. So somebody's maybe interested now that they've heard you talk about this. How would they get involved maybe on the FreeBSD side of that? Do you guys have a mailing list or group or way to get in touch with other enthusiasts?
There is. I suppose you could email me directly, and I'll direct you to other people. There is the wiki page on wiki.freebsd.org. We are listed there.
So switching gears a bit, tell us how you first got interested in embedded development.
Oh, that's easy. My father was taking a computer course. I got interested in his computer course, and I think my first program was a tic-tac-toe game on a 1401 IBM computer.
Mm-hmm.
That is night school thing. Of course, it was obsolete even then, but of course, companies keep 1401s.
Sure.
Or I've got a visitor who's trying to help me with the laptop here. She's meowing away here.
Oh, okay.
A little distracted there. That's what happened. And I got interested. So that had sense switches and sense and display LED, well, lights, I guess. They weren't even LED back then. So I guess that wasn't bad. I mean, it was a card deck, I guess. But, that was... So it naturally falls in when you start playing with electronics, and you see a computer and you think, gee, the two can go together, and that's suddenly how you get into embedded.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we've heard rumor that you do some stuff with Raspberry Pi 3s now, or you've been messing around with that. Is that true? What's going on?
Well, I'm working on Raspberry Pi 3, getting it going in 64-bit mode. And I have a learning curve. I used to do a lot of embedded, but this is a new ball game for me. So it's certainly not the same code base as BSDI's. Mm-hmm. It's a little cleaner in the FreeBSD code set. I'll tell you that much. So I've got it past U-boot. I've actually got the kernel booting, so I just have to hook up some drivers to get it to come up single user.
Okay.
In 64-bit mode. I don't think it'd be too hard to get it up in 32-bit mode. In fact, for quite a while, Raspberry Pi themselves weren't going to support it in 64-bit mode. I don't know whether they've changed their tune on that. They were just treating it as a faster RPI too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Ubuntu have a 64-bit Raspberry Pi 3, so we're not all that far behind, to be honest. I think we could have had a 32-bit image running on the Raspberry Pi 3 if you really wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think somebody got it into single user mode in 32-bit at BSDCan, but obviously the goal was always 64-bit, so I don't know that's been really chased down all the way.
Like I said, I'm so sorely tempted to do a TrueOS build for it. One of these days, I'm going to buy some 3s and do that. It's going to happen, mark my words.
But how are you going to do ZFS?
We'll figure something out, Alan.
Okay.
Strap on external memory over the USB port. What could go wrong?
Well, I guess it's got a couple of gigs of memory, doesn't it? And it's once it's 64-bit, it's not so bad because you're not running out of memory address space, right?
Mm-hmm. Sorry about that, Diane. Didn't mean to trample on you there.
Oh, no, I don't mind at all.
So, I guess that's interesting.
So how usable is FreeBSD on the Raspberry Pi 3 now? I guess it doesn't quite boot yet.
Not very.
Okay.
Unless you ran it in 32-bit mode. You could probably run it in 32-bit mode, but I don't think we have a freaking Ethernet driver for it. It's Broadcom based, and
that's
a
always
little
special.
Secretive, yes. Yeah, it should be interesting.
I wonder if there are instructions somewhere on how to bring up a 32-bit kernel on the Raspberry Pi 3.
There are for Linux. I don't think it would be too hard to do with FreeBSD. I just don't have the extra time cycles to
Yes, we'd rather you focus on 64-bit and get that working.
Yeah, get the 64-bit first. You let me know when that happens, Diane, because I'm very interested.
Yeah, it's getting close. I had a considerable help from the hardened BSD folks at BSD Can, so I want to thank Sean for kicking me in the pants on that.
Yeah, Sean was saying in chat here that they're looking at either the RPI3 or the Soft Iron Overdrive as being the ARM64 reference platform for hardened BSD. So there's others out there definitely interested in this. So it's good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess building on, we talked a little bit earlier about Adrian's post. He had a blog article talking about what small systems need in FreeBSD specifically. So we wanted to ask you kind of the same thing. Like, what sort of things do you think the FreeBSD project needs to work on to improve usability on these kind of dev boards or these tiny devices?
I think really Adrian and Warner are really the two guys who really know what's needed on the FreeBSD platform. I think they know what's needed more than I would, because I haven't been doing it too long. I mean, I'm just working on the RPI3, but I would agree that I would say that there are conflicting demands put upon a server OS versus a desktop OS versus an embedded OS that need to be reconciled. Some of the heavy-duty memory hashing tables that you would use on a server to improve speed are just going to make it unusable on a small platform.
Sure.
Right. Too much. That little bit of waste on your big server is great for the extra performance, but that's more memory than you have on the embedded thing.
Well, yeah. Though I mean, it's slackening, and the term embedded itself
can mean so much.
A pretty broad term,
right?
Too.
Yeah, like
you can go from anything from a PIC to what we're working on now with little small Unix boards.
Right. Well, because, some of the MIPS routers and so on Adrian's talking about have 32 or 64 megabytes of memory, whereas the RPIs can have a couple of gigs, which even there, that's a very, one of his gripes was Crontab uses a 1.3 megabytes of memory on MIPS on his little thing, and that's more that's a significant percentage of his 32 megabytes of RAM, whereas when you have 2 gigs, the 1.3 megabytes probably doesn't bother you so much. And so, even embedded.
You also have a disk you can swap to on a bigger system. You don't really care if the resident set is not all in memory. I mean, you can page in a little bit of memory when you page in a bit, but on an embedded platform, sometimes you don't have a disk. I mean, the only disk you have is the flash memory,
and it's read-only,
RAM disk.
Right? Yeah,
and you don't really you don't have spinning Rust. You don't even have an SSD.
Yep.
So
makes sense.
You really should. It would be nice if everybody could be nice to each other in the project. Is all I'm saying. Like, we don't need to do this anymore because 386s. We don't need to support 386s anymore. I mean, nobody uses the
new dev boards are actually coming out as i386.
Yeah, so there's not even that. It's any small system. If you want to put at a prior company, I actually worked on a cold fire processor, and we ended up putting micro Linux on it. No MMU, no memory management unit on it, and I actually did the port for that. And that was tiny. That was tiny, but I don't think. Well, we certainly can't support MMUs, non-MMU embedded, but. I would almost think it might be nice to be able to do that. But so we do have to always. I think it behooves us all to try and work with each other and say, okay, well, maybe maybe I don't think I'll ever use an i386 on my desktop ever again, but this poor guy down the street working in FreeBSD routers has to work on a 32 megabyte router board. So we just have to think of each other, I think, a bit more.
Yeah, that same kind of argument came up when we were talking about removing support for some old devices, like some kind of, I think it was the CD-ROMs that connect over the audio port on your sound card.
Oh, yeah.
And a couple of like old network cards, like, yeah, that you can't even buy a motherboard that has the kind of slot you would have to put this in anymore. But at the same time, the open source and BSD kind of have this reputation of, well, you can pick up any old machine out of the garage and run BSD on it. It's like, well, yeah, but not if we keep throwing away support for anything that you can't buy today.
Correct. Yeah. Well, even laptops, we ran into that. There is some defunct hardware that no one supports anymore, except they use it on laptops. Well, it used to be the case a few years ago. And you always run into something like that.
Well, it's like, how many people are still using Spark? And it's like, not very many. And then there was the one guy, he's like, my whole business is finding the businesses that have all these Spark machines and reformatting them to FreeBSD so that they can actually run modern programs on them and get all this extra life out of them. And please don't take away Spark 64 support.
Yep.
So are kind of related to what you were just saying, are there any other changes you would like to see in the BSD project or in the community to better go forward?
Oh, I think just making these painless, making the embedded platforms as painless to install as possible. And I think that we're working towards that.
We have images now for a lot of things, which has been a huge help.
That has been a huge help. And having packages for everything.
Yes.
Would also be a huge help. Some in the amateur radio community have been taking Raspberry Pis and turning them into mobile digital terminals. I mean, running some digital signal processing from an RPI out in the field. Like, you can run it off a battery. So having the packages for that would be great.
Yeah, so I think a lot of good work by the Redis engineering team to start making those images. Stacy Sun and Sean Bruno and others for actually, getting all the QEMU user mode stuff so that we can have MIPS and ARM v6 packages built on the FreeBSD cluster, and obviously the people to package and Brian Drury and getting all that stuff actually going it's been really nice to see all those people working, all those different little projects kind of coming together to the fact that you can grab your Raspberry Pi 2 and just package install Xorg and it'll work.
Well, the fact that we even have mechanisms for building packages now, like the work Bruno did with the QEMU, you can build on an AMD 64 and do the linking in a QEMU to get ARM packages. That's what gives me hope that this may be a thing we can do on TrueOS, because in my mind, if we can't do it with all the packages, I'm not doing it.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I want a package that I want all the packages, or at least the biggest subset I can get that works on ARM.
Well, because when I was trying to turn a Raspberry Pi 2 into a little streaming platform for BSDCan, ultimately the hardware wasn't quite good enough, but we needed to build our own packages of like FFmpeg with quite a few different options, and then also try to strip it down as much as we could because of the amount of time it takes to build. It turns out, if you don't build the docs, you don't need Python. And so on. It was really nice to be able to build those on my 32-core server instead of trying to do something else.
Because I wanted out this year too. So, Diane, what keeps you motivated to keep working on open source? Is it just the ham radio project keeps you going, or I guess the embedded stuff now is of interest too?
I think it's fun. Why else do anything if it isn't fun?
That is true. You got to love what you do.
I love what you do, and it's challenging. It's amusing. It's interesting. It's fun. I like puzzles, and complicated, interesting puzzles. They keep me interested. And I really don't know what else to tell you. That's just going to have to do.
Okay. Hey, that's a good enough reason as any. Matter of fact, I'd prefer people enjoy it. Otherwise, it's a chore. And if it's a chore, you lose interest and wander away.
Well, why? I mean, why bother if it's a chore?
Right. Well, for me, every once in a while, maybe it starts to feel like that. But then I go to a conference and get to talk to a bunch of other people and get all excited about this new thing somebody else is working on, and gives me an idea of something I could do, and it kind of recharges my battery.
Yes, absolutely.
Was there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here today, Diane. Even with the internet issues, we managed to make it work.
Yeah, I tried to get back on it as quickly as I could.
Yeah, that worked out
fine.
fine.
Run to get my hotspot. Okay, good. I couldn't tell what you guys were talking about.
Even with all this technology, we can make it work. This is good.
Yeah,
we
can make it.
So thanks for being here, and of course we'll be back with our next segment in just a moment. Okay, back for interview. We got a news roundup to get to, but really quick before we start doing that, of course, the next sponsor this week is going to be DigitalOcean. Website for that, DigitalOcean.com, which, come on, it's really easy to type. You can find it. You should go ahead and head on over there right now and get signed up. Create your account. And of course, when you do, don't forget to enter. There's a place you can enter a coupon code. And this is better than any just regular coupon code. It's free BSD Now is what you type, and that gives you a $10 credit, which if you're doing their lowest end VM, which is $5 a month, that's good for 2 months of playing around with the VM that's still backed by SSDs. And yes, you can throw free BSD in there. So the coupon code doesn't tie you to anything particular. It's just a full $10 credit. So if you want to run a Linux VM or spin up anything, if you want to put OpenBSD in the cloud or Dragonfly or Net, there's ways to do that too. They give you access to a nice HTML5 console and everything. So very good stuff. And of course, when you're looking at their website, be sure to check out their data center locations and test out their tools. I was a really big fan of being able to ping and see who is the closest, because we were going to deploy a Mumble server for some game days we do. And I was like, I need something with really low latency to my house, and being able to ping around and find the best one was really handy, because it's not always the one you think, it turns out, depending on what internet company you use. But of course, check them out today and let them know that you heard about it here. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, so they've introduced their block storage stuff. So if you grab the this $20 VM here with the 2 gigabytes of RAM, it comes with 40 gigabytes of SSD storage. But you can rent their block storage now at 10 cents per gigabyte per month at whatever level you want, between 1 gigabyte and 16 terabytes. So you have a small SSD there that you put the OS on, and then you make a ZFS pool on, which they support now. And actually, you can even, the images they put on the SSD for you can now be UFS or ZFS. You get to pick when you create it. So you boom, ZFS VM in under 55 seconds, just like that. But then you can have your second ZFS storage for other stuff that's on this bigger pool, and you can always make that bigger over time and just ZFS expand it. And if you need to shrink it, you can even just create a second smaller one and ZFS replication stuff onto the smaller one, and now you're paying less. So it allows you to actually have this flexibility about how much storage you actually need to pay for.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So again, I mean, there's no point in waiting anymore, guys. You can go sign up anytime, 24/7, 365, make your account and start spinning up those VMs. I know me and Alan use them here for different nefarious reasons, but sometimes you need something up in the cloud, and it's certainly the easiest way to do it. Okay, so let's get into the news roundup. So first up, you can see Michael W. Lucas. So author Michael W. Lucas, of course, we've interviewed quite a bit on the show here, but maybe you're looking for a chance to interact with him in Meet Space. But that actually sounds kind of wrong. So we'll move on. Anyway, he's posted a list over on his blog of upcoming conferences he's going to be speaking at. It looks like starting with Ohio Linux Fest, which is going to be October 7th through 8th, where he's going to be giving an introduction to ZFS talk, which I'm sure will be fascinating. If you're anywhere in the U.S., the Midwest region, can make it out to Ohio Linux Fest, I suggest you do so. That'll be good. We usually have some folks from our office go too. I think Ken, my brother who does Lumina Desktop, is going to be there giving a presentation, I'm pretty sure, this year. So you'll want to go check that out. And then also he mentions November 8th, he'll be at MUG, which is the Michigan Users Group, giving a PAM talk as well. So you'll want to go check that out also.
Especially since it's on Election Day and is titled PAM is Un-American.
That is right. Pam is very un-American. But the sad note, though, no Meet BSD for Michael this year, which we will observe a moment of silence in your absence while you're gone. But if you're able to make it to one of the aforementioned gatherings, be sure to bring your books for autographs. We promise Michael doesn't bite very much anyway.
Yes, just don't give him a butter knife.
Yes.
But other than that, he's also at the semi-bug meetings, which is the Southeast Michigan BSD users group.
That's right. So if you're looking for a chance to get those books of yours autographed, you got some opportunities now. Okay, so what's this next one? It's hard work printing nothing.
Yes.
Oh, no, just unplug.
No.
Okay.
So
what's going on?
it all started with a bug report about LibreSSL and the OpenSSL tool, which apparently causes OpenSSL can crash when it tries to print null. So if you have a printf that has null in it, it can crash. This bug doesn't manifest on OpenBSD because the printf provided by libc will convert null in a string. So if you put a %s in your printf and you give it a null, it'll actually print in ellipses the word null. So that actually results in some characters coming out. However, this behavior is not required by the standard and, as observed, is not universal. On OS 10, if you try to print null, it crashes. So when SN_printf silently accepts null, this leads to the propagation of the error. And then they have a nice dialogue here of Safari. It says, Safari will not save your password because null requested passwords not to be saved. And obviously the site name is missing in that dialogue there. But anyway, it says, there's an argument to be made that silly error messages are better than crashing browsers, but stacking layers of sand seems like a poor means of building a robust software.
The silly error message should be the warning that we may have a problem here.
So,
go fix that.
As soon as the next development release of OpenBSD restarts, which I think it has at this point, some developers began testing a patch that will remove this crutch from printf in OpenBSD. And then the rest of the story is about the fallout from this. They said that one of the early victims was actually a program that prints null. But, well, you'll see. So they have an app called talloc or talloc. So libtalloc is what is called an OpenBSD ports, is a malloc replacement library that does hierarchical pools of memory. It has a configure script that runs and checks for various things, right? We've all seen when you run /configure and you get like checking if your system supports this system call and checking if your system supports that. And he's got some interesting digressions here about, checking for the variable IPv6_v6 only. IPv6 is the future of the internet. So obviously we want to make sure that our malloc replacement is ready to do IPv6 only environments. Time to throw away that legacy IPv4 malloc.
Gone.
He says this carries on for a few minutes. Libtalloc itself takes less than 5 seconds to compile, but the configure script will spend 100 times that long probing for functions to get and set file system extended attributes, which shouldn't matter in the case of malloc. It's the typical case. He says here, code reuse is the key to efficiency, right? You get autocomp basically checking for everything and doing it wrong. When I had to manually compile something the other day, I ran into that autoconf bug with FreeBSD 10, where autoconf decided it was actually FreeBSD 1.
Oh, it was 1?
Yeah, and it was like, sorry, you don't support shared libraries on your legacy version of FreeBSD. I'm like, this is the newest version. It was an 11.
That's true. We dropped shared libraries. That's so 1990s.
Yeah. So I had to go in there and hack the configure script and make it not decide that I was running FreeBSD 1. So anyway, as it went through, eventually it says checking for a C99 compliant VSN printf, not found. So they looked in the code, and their test is to run a printf of the string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and make sure that there's 9 characters, and make sure that they actually what was printed is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then they have one where they printed with enough padding and a bunch of other things. And then the last test is to print 0, the variable 0, which, is the same as null, and make sure that at least 3 characters got printed. So like if you're printing null, why would you expect at least 3 characters to be printed? Because normally you would print null or nil or something. So he says, now we have 3 problems. The first is that passing an int to a function that expects size t on 64-bit platforms, those are likely not the same. And it only works because the implementation makes sure that when loading a 32-bit value into a register, that it clears all the top 32 bits so you don't get random large numbers when you try to use a 32-bit number. The second is a bit silly. Why are there backslashes escaping the $sign? This is probably because somebody copied a test from some other language like Perl or Shell or Ruby that has string interpolation, or because this code is written by a shell script during the configure, and one too many levels of escaping caused one of those escapes for the $sign to end up in the source code. But C doesn't have string interpolation. So the second is actually accompanied by a compiler warning unknown escape sequence, escape $sign, but nobody looks at those. It says, and then third, we have the test for printing null, except we use 0, and that only passes the first 32 bits of it as 0, not the top 32 if they had actually sent null. But anyway, it says, no matter, when we check to make sure it printed at least 3 characters. Why 3? What's wrong with just printing an empty string? He says, so on a couple of observations, the test checking that our smprintf function conforms to C99 standard actually contains, at a minimum, 3 deviations from the standard. It should say checking for non-conformant vsnprintf.
Yes.
He said, even if printf should print null, or whatever, it breaks the basic check of if you print your %s into a buffer and then make sure that the number of characters that were printed is the same as the length of the string. Of course, if you're dealing with a null pointer, all bets are off. But I wonder what people expect printf null to work, if they expect printf null to work, what do they expect strlen of a null pointer to do? You really don't want it to return 6, because that's what bracket null bracket is in its length, right? So after all the...
I can see that causing all kinds of stuff down the back.
After all the configure testing, eventually the build will fail because somebody forgot to actually add the replacement object file into the make file. So when this configure script decides that the printf provided by your operating system isn't good enough, it tries to use its own, but the make file isn't actually set up to do it. So if it ever did not like the printf, the one it was supposed to use instead, it wasn't actually hooked up because nobody's system's ever failed this configure test before. And so if the replacement function has never, ever been used, it's hardly reassuring that it's actually better tested than the version in OpenBSD's libc.
That's a good point.
What's interesting is because it's an OpenBSD library, it's entirely possible that the alternate provided is the one from the OpenBSD libc. But yes. Yes, Ted always has the best posts.
Yeah, he always finds the craziest stuff, man. Good stuff, though. All right, so who's the next one who blogged about WXRX and OpenBSD 6.0?
Right, so this is a follow-up to a previous post that I had talked about what was missing and not implemented and so on in the WXRX support in OpenBSD. So this is a follow-up about it based on OpenBSD 6, where they talk about the things that have improved since then. And in particular, it mentions at the end of the overview here, hopefully BSD Now will cover this as well. But it says OpenBSD 6 was released and it has got some exciting new security features from the perspective of the person here. He says, chief among them is the technical enforcement of WXRX in userland. Since moving to a technical control rather than a policy statement for enforcing executable space protection as a result of discussions sparked from the blog post he did originally, he says he's very excited about this development, and although that giving a demonstration and discussion would be in order, in the spirit of not putting the headline on page 1 and the retraction on page 11. So it goes into what he's talking about.
We're not going to go all times on you, don't worry.
But yeah, it talks about basically what's different, and it compares what OpenBSD's WXRX does compared to HardenedBSD and NetBSD's PAX model and how that's actually different. So he says, recall my interest in the subject stems from the objective requirements of the NIAP-sponsored Operating System Protection Profile, which states that an operating system should prevent an application from being able to map a page of memory with both the write and execute permission, like protecting mmap, and that once mapped, a page should not be able to have permissions escalated. It shouldn't get more permissions ever. This is there's room for interpretation in the meaning of this requirement around two competing ways to implement it. I made my case from my personal preference in the last post. However, the competing case, wherein we were merely concerned with a page of memory never being simultaneously write or execute, is not necessarily enforcing, saying that you can't go from write to execute. And then that does have merit and would likely meet the letter of the requirement. He says, OpenBSD, which is branded WXRX originates, now enforces a strict WXRX definition and not the PAX/GR security one, which is once write, never execute, is what the policy is in OpenBSD 6.0. Doing a little side-by-side between OpenBSD and hardened BSD. In OpenBSD 6, when an application attempts to map a page of memory with write and execute, the process will be terminated with sig abort, which is signal 6, causing the process to die and dump core so that you can find where it does it in the code and fix it. Attempting to run my test application, which is CC memtest, which has 3 cases that it tests for enforcement, does not get past the first test in OpenBSD 6, and the application is aborted. And if you look in GDB, you can see why. Handling the same case, the PAX model, which is what NetBSD and hardened BSD use, implementation does something a little differently. As we see in both GDB and the procset output, the page of memory is actually created and mapped. However, it's only writable and not executable. So when you ask for a page that's both write and execute,
just ignores what you
OpenBSD
asked.
crashes, whereas the PAX model creates it, just doesn't allow you to do the thing you're not supposed to do.
Doesn't that mean you'll fail much farther down the road if you accidentally try to execute that, or you want to? Like if the program's wrong. So we just push the failure farther down.
Right, which might mean most programs will work until they try to do something they're not supposed to.
Right, and then now you're stuck like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I crashed seemingly randomly.
Yes. As we see in both GDB and the proxy, however, is not only writable, I lost my place. Anyway, implementations return a writable.
I didn't mean to distract you.
The implementation returns a writable page whenever write and execute permissions are asked for. The application is actually allowed to run and may or may not be okay. Attempts to perform an action on the page for which you don't have permissions will fail, i.e. attempting to execute code that is placed in that buffer. However, as we see with the OpenBSD implementation, the fault is considered to be the allocation of that memory region itself, not the unapproved access to the memory page. So it can just come down to the way you read the requirements, which way you would have done it, right? If the requirement is that once you've written to the buffer, or if you write to the buffer, you can never execute it, then failing when you try to execute it is the right thing. Or if you read it the other way, it's like if you try to make a buffer that can be executed and be written, you should just not even let that go forward.
Sure.
In this regards,
I'm more of a fan of the strict definition personally, because I'd rather, if I've programmatically asked for something and you're not going to give it to me, let me fail there.
But yes, but then if the program was asking for it and it was never actually going to use it, then more applications just work and you don't need to modify a bunch of ports. But people really should be doing it properly in the first place.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. I don't know. Just the correct side of it.
Sean Webb from hardened BSD says, in practice, we see that most applications that ask for both write and execute pages will segfault almost immediately because they're asking for that and they're going to try to use it right away and they're going to basically crash almost a couple lines later in the code. But from the user perspective,
going to sit out there and start doing something useful and then just seemingly die.
But anyway, the article says, in this regard, the behavior of the OpenBSD implementation is more readily apparent. The program authors requested write and read and execute page of memory, and that request causes the program to terminate, as opposed to providing that page of memory with different permissions than were explicitly requested by the application's author, and then prohibiting or then exhibiting failure behavior later on when you actually try to do something to that memory that you weren't allowed to. They say, because hardened BSD doesn't abort the process, we can set a breakpoint and continue on to additional tests and see how mprotect hardening actually works. And they say, here we see that the application has successfully mapped a page of memory as executable and then attempts to escalate permission to include being able to write. But the mprotect call returns an error code, and we see from procset that the page of memory in question was created as executable but not readable. His quick and dirty test program doesn't have a handler for SIG-abort, and rather than write one in, he pulled some of the tests out so he could run the later ones on OpenBSD. And he says, again, we see that the page was created properly, but an attempt to make it both executable and writable causes the program to receive SIG-abort and die. And the article goes on to talk about some of the other differences between the OpenBSD and hardened BSD implementations.
Okay.
And then it says, in conclusion, when I looked into this issue back in the spring, OpenBSD did not have technical controls in place in userland, just a policy that application authors should not map, write, and execute at the same time. Hardened BSD and NetBSD both implement the PAX model and were able to pass his tests, although NetBSD needed a sysctl tweak to enable the protection, and hardened BSD has it on by default. However, discussions after the press from the previous post led to new technical control implementation in OpenBSD 6.0. He says, obviously, the two approaches have some fundamental differences. OpenBSD's approach is more deterministic in how one might expect a program to behave than the PAX model, but both the OpenBSD approach and the PAX approach meet the letter of the law from the common criteria standpoint of what's actually required, as neither will allow an application to map a page of memory with write and execute permissions. OpenBSD merely shuts the door on the activity in a more spectacular fashion.
Right.
He says, overall, though...
Fail big and fail early.
He says, overall, though, we are now in a position in which 3 operating systems exhibit correct behavior with regards to the requirements without requiring additional patches to be applied, like bringing in GR security into Linux. He says all 3 of them happen to be BSDs. And he hopes that FreeBSD might look at adopting the patches from hardened BSD, and then all the mainline BSDs will have it. But in the meantime, the inclusion of OpenBSD in the club makes it harder for other OS vendors to not take requirements seriously moving forward. He says, in a related note, NetBSD has finally removed the last read, write, execute page of memory from its kernel, and you can find the announcement here, which we covered a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay.
It's nice to see
so our last story.
Stuff we cover causing work to actually happen, and then having follow-up articles about how that actually happened.
Yeah, so our last story here, we've mentioned Let's K-Encrypt before, which if you don't remember, that was the native C version of the Let's Encrypt client that was developed by Kristaps, who we've interviewed here before. But it looks like it's undergoing a little bit of a name change to Acme client, and it's actually made its way into the OpenBSD base system as part of that name change. So that's pretty slick. It looks like this should ensure first-class support for management of Let's Encrypt certificates. And of course, we're hoping the portable version continues to thrive as well, so we can use that on other BSDs, other platforms. And of course, we want to throw our congratulations to Kristaps for getting that into base. That's pretty cool. That's gosh, it seems like we didn't talk about that too long ago, and it's already made it into the base system. That was fast.
Well, I think it just had to wait for the next time commits were allowed to go into OpenBSD, because they have this like 3-month on, 3-month off cycle. Yeah. And so.
Yeah, but they got that in. That's pretty slick. Well, either way, I know I still got to switch. I haven't had time. I got to switch some of my systems over. I'm still using, I think it's a combination of Shell, and one system's using the Python one. I got to change that. It needs to be fixed. I apologize, Kristaps, for not switching over.
Yeah,
but hopefully soon.
I was going to use it, but my system had OpenSSL, not LibreSSL, so it wouldn't compile.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll just have to use my laptop that has TrueOS on it, which is all LibreSSL.
Yep, for sure. Okay, well, we'll be back and do Beastie Bits here in just a moment. Okay, so our next sponsor this week, of course, is going to be Tarsnap. And the website for that, tarsnap.com/BSDNow, where you want to go get signed up and start doing your backups right away. And of course, because it's Tarsnap and we love Tarsnap, what's really cool is your backups are done safely and securely the way any backup should be done. And how can I say that? Well, go look at the source code if you don't trust me. Hopefully you can read really good source, but if you can't find someone, you can have them vouch for you that it does what it says it's supposed to. But basically, the long and short of it is nothing unencrypted ever leaves your system. Everything going out over the wire is fully encrypted by a key which only exists on your local side. So you're not giving access to any bit of your data, because once data is up in the cloud, let's be honest, you can never really delete it. It just kind of persists. Who knows where it got copied to, right? So with Tarsnap, though, if you shred that key or destroy your only copy of the key, if you only have one, then you're good. You've basically rendered the data useless and meaningless. So it is pretty cool the way you can invalidate stuff that's in the cloud. But again, don't take my word for it. Go look at the source code yourself. Look at how Tarsnap sets it up. And of course, take a look at the price, because when they measure picodollars per byte month, it's pretty cheap, especially if you're doing a lot of duplicated data, because it does the dedupe before it sends anything.
And all your stuff is signed as well, because on top of making sure that your data is encrypted and everybody else can't read it, you need to make sure when you pull it back, it's actually the same as when you sent it.
Okay. Very cool. So go ahead and get set up today. And of course, if you have stories related to how it saved your bacon, we'd love to hear those as well. Send them over. Okay, so BSD bits. First up, we have OpenBSD. They did their release songs on the 6.0 release, and it looks like the one we want to highlight here is called Goodbye, No More CD Releases. Did you want to go over some of the lyrics on that?
The lyrics is just goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. But the important thing is the lyrics were written by Bob Beck, composition, arrangement, instruments, and recording by Jonathan Lewis, and importantly, vocals by Theodore Rat. So,
Very cool.
There's an MP3 and an OGG there if you want to check out the song.
Okay, so next up, we got a link to FreeBSD 101 hacks. It looks like over on gitbooks.io. Anything you wanted to add for that one?
It looks like they're just compiling hacks basically as a Git book, so it's kind of almost wiki-like, but Git at the same time. And they're just putting together a giant list of hacks you can do, and it doesn't look like they have 101 yet, so I'm guessing they're hoping
they need more
to get more help from you.
The goal is 101.
Yeah, so they just have lots of random things, like how to use the procstat utility to find out what's happening with the process, or the sockstat utility to find out what's listening on that port, or where's that other connection coming from, or information about using Subversion, or printing a list of your PCI devices, and all kinds of stuff like that.
Oh, our producer helpfully says he thinks 101 is the college course reference. Whoops, I completely misread that. I thought it was like literally 101 hacks. Yeah. Okay, so FreeBSD course 101, getting started. How about
it's lots of little, individual things you might need to do and how to do them. And I'm sure that the reason it's a Git book is because they would like more contributions.
Good. Okay, so next up, we have LibreSSL has been enabled by default in hardened BSD, and we have a link to that article over at the website there that Sean Webb wrote. Looks like they've gone ahead and switched over to that being built into the base, so that's good, and it's just on by default now. Excellent. Good stuff. I like to see more and more people doing that. And let's see here. Dragonfly BSD has removed the last bits of Linux 32-bit emulation and has no plans to implement 64-bit emulation. So it just sounds like they're kicking Linux Capat to the curb entirely. Okay, good to see. I suppose if it's
OpenBSD has done that as well.
Yeah, if it's old and bit rotted, get rid of it. If it's not doing
well, yeah, because I don't know if they've touched it much in Dragonfly, but when they forked from FreeBSD, that would have been Linux emulation that was in FreeBSD 4.10, something like that. It's old. 4.9, I think, is when they forked. So yeah, that could be pretty old.
I don't see any point in keeping that around. Okay, and OpenBSD, of course, a moment of silence because they have officially sent the 32-bit Spark to the great bit bucket in the sky. So, of course, thanks for the memory, Spark 32. All right, anyway. Let's see. We have a Front Range BSD Users Group September meeting. Where are they located again?
This is Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado. Okay. And of course, we need to remind you, and our producers helpfully made a note for us to remind you guys of this, but email into the show about your local bug groups. JT, our producer, has actually been working on a list, and we're hoping to make it public here at the next show. So if you want your group listed and mentioned in the show, you only have another week to do it. Send it in right away.
Yes, and we, hopefully we'll be able to try to remind people to make it out to their local bug. I know that it's easy to forget the second Tuesday of every month. That's next week, right? Nope, that was this week. You missed it. When you hear about the great things that happen at the bug, you're like, I really wish I could have been there.
Cool.
So yeah, this one, the Front Range BSD user group is September 12th at 5 p.m. It's at Spectra Logic, which is 6285 Lookout Road in Boulder, Colorado. And I think that's hosted by FreeBSD committer Brad Davis. So definitely check it out. And I guess, do you want to read the rest of the email, or? Might as well. He says, Roller writes in and says, this is my first Front Range BSD user meetup, and I'm excited to go. I was contacted by Deb Goodkin at the FreeBSD Foundation after I filled out the community survey, and she asked if I was interested in attending the meeting. I said yes, and was copied on an email with Brad Davis and so on. I believe the meetings are going to be the same time and place every 2 weeks, and I just have to confirm that, though. There's supposed to be a meeting last week, or 2 weeks ago now, but it was unfortunately canceled. He says he arrived a bit early and had a chance to talk with Brad Davis and learned about the cancellation then. But they spoke briefly about the Edge Router Lite, and he's working on getting FreeBSD running on his for this week's meeting.
Cool. Okay. Very cool. Well, speaking of bugs, so Knoxbug had a meeting last week, which unfortunately I couldn't make because I was out of town at VMworld. But it sounds like their planned speaker, Mark, had some car trouble, couldn't get there. But not to be deterred, they managed to have Ken and Joe, who are from the IX office here, were able to do a TrueOS sneak peek, kind of a wrap up and overview of TrueOS on the fly. So they ended up having a good presentation anyway, which is pretty neat. I see they even got the laptop hooked up and got to show it off live. So that is pretty cool. They said the presentation lasted about 90 minutes, even though they had no advance warning they were going to get called on to do that. So that is neat that they were able to roll with the punches and make that happen. But hopefully Mark gets rescheduled for next month, because I think he was going to do the ZFS talk. And I'm glad I'll be able to hear that, because I know about the TrueOS stuff. So if I was going to miss one, that was the one to miss, I guess. But anyway, good stuff. So, of course, we'll look forward to next month's meeting as well. Okay, so it's time for feedback and questions now, folks. So first up, we have Cody who has some TrueOS questions here. And let me switch over to the right tab. He said, hey, I want to switch over to TrueOS 11. By the way, it's 12 now. He said, I ran into some roadblocks, so to speak, and rather than explaining them, he said, I'll just put them into a questions list. He asked, how come we aren't providing proper drivers for the AMD R7 265 GPU?
Because FreeBSD doesn't have those yet?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if Matt Macy's work makes that driver go yet, if he's brought that in.
Ultimately, the AMD GPUs are the ones he actually wants to use himself.
Yeah, ironically, he's getting...
Eventually, that's the goal.
Yeah. So give us some time on that. What I would do is get in touch with us on the Gitter chat is one thing we use. Maybe mention to him that you have that particular GPU. So I'll be honest with you, part of the problem with AMD support is I think he's gotten some of it working. We don't have any AMD hardware here to test with. So 10 years of doing PCBSD has meant that we've bought only NVIDIA and Intel for our laptops, right? So I don't have a stack of AMD cards laying around to go try this out. So if we need to do some tweaks to the Xorg detection, we'll need to know about that. Maybe we can work with you to get that figured out, make sure your particular card's detected. Next up, he asked, does KDE Partition Manager work for FreeBSD? I don't know if that was ever ported over to FreeBSD. I think that's really Linux specific.
I don't even know that was a thing.
Yeah. I'd heard vague mention of like that, but I'm not sure what you're specifically referring to. I don't know. You'll have to look through the ports tree and see if that's a thing on FreeBSD, if that's ever been ported over. And he asked, can I build the Numx Frost themes from this GitHub, which makes XFCE look better? Sure.
Probably.
I guess if you would like to, go for it.
The GitHub is a Linux distro, so I don't know. But I imagine that the theme stuff is usually pretty generic and not OS specific at all.
Yeah, if you can pull the theme stuff out, and better yet, if you could maybe fork it to your own repo and then do a release of it, and then we'll put it in ports, so then you can just package add it for everyone. Like that's even better. That would be the preferred method, but I don't see any problem. I can't imagine there being a licensing reason why it couldn't be done. but just a matter of somebody wanting to do it. And it sounds like you just volunteered. So get in touch with us again on Gitter or whatever. We'll see if we can help you out with some of that.
So John writes in and asks, he says, "Hi guys, just thought I'd let you know I made a script for sending datasets incrementally to a USB backup or other drive from a FreeNAS, or would work with FreeBSD as well." He says he uses it to back up every week and take the drive to work so that it's off-site. So he provides a link to his GitHub where he has his FreeNAS and IOHive script called freenasbackup.sh. It's not a feature of FreeNAS. You can't, select individual datasets or anything. And there's no real easy way that I could find. But he looked at some forum posts, and hopefully with a little love and a sprinkling of ZFS magic, he's threw together this script. He says it also create a run ID so that it can be tracked in the FreeNAS app for Splunk. But it may be useful for others to join events together like that as well. And he was
that's neat.
It's up on GitHub, so if you have some improvements to it, you can send those as pull requests.
I don't know. Make sure you post that to the forums as well, and just see if you can get some notice on that. Maybe some other folks will jump in and help you out. Sometimes the FreeNAS devs will see that too. Yeah. I may have to tell them, hey, we should see what we can pull out of that. That looks good. Okay, so who do we got next here? How do you pronounce the name? Hermino?
Yeah.
I apologize. I probably just butchered your name. Anyway, it says, "Hey guys, a while back I asked about getting FreeBSD to work on a Power PC machine. I really did not get that to work as I like, so recently I decided to give OpenBSD a try. They have a PowerPC port, Mac PPC, for older Apple PPC desktops and laptops. He said the installation was extremely simple, and in no time it loaded. I installed XFCE, i3, PEC-WM using package. I wanted to see the performance under these different environments, and so far I'm really impressed. Sound worked out of the box, which is something I manually do under Linux. Accelerated graphics is somewhat working, at least to the point where I can play video at MPlayer with XV format. You got Arc GTK theme installed, and I'm thinking of changing it since my windows are dragging when I move them. The downside is lack of a browser option for Mac PPC. The only graphical browser I can get working is NetSurf. It's fast and lightweight, but very limited in features. I'm probably going to keep on my PowerBook G4 for a while, at least the 7.0, at least till I guess the 7.0, so I can see how the upgrade process goes. Anyway, thanks for the show." Well, very cool. Glad to see you found a place to put that old PowerBook to some use. All right, you want to do the next one here, Alan? From Dennis?
So Dennis writes in and says he's a software engineer. He's digging into the inner workings of the make command and come across a problem that somebody who was chatting with on Freenode said we might know the answer to. When I looked online for the FreeBSD man page for make, it references another page for more detailed information, which is pmake, a tutorial. However, this document is not in sync with the FreeBSD man page make documentation URLs below. That's likely because I think it was in FreeBSD 10 or 11, we changed from using pmake to using bmake. So they're not the same thing anymore. But in older versions, they were the same thing. So he says, after doing some digging, I found out that sometime in the last year-ish, they changed from using pmake to using bmake. Not that I've forgotten the truly solid answer this far on the vagueness of that. Anyway, to confound the issue, when I install bmake or pmake, they both just make. Or both become just make, so no way to tell for sure which one is being supplied with FreeBSD 10.x, and more importantly, on his FreeNAS 9.10. Now, while the FreeBSD man page make seems to be current, that pmake tutorial is no indication other than the pointer to the pmake document what the version of make the man page is documenting, whether the pointer to pmake is simply wrong, and that man page is documenting bmake, and there's something else. I think that would be the case. It also depends on what version of the operating system you're looking at the man pages for. Because when pmake was changed to bmake, we obviously don't retroactively change the man pages in older versions, but in newer versions, the man page should point to the right thing.
Sure.
And I don't know the history of how related bmake is to pmake. It might actually be a fork or something, and so most things that apply to pmake would apply to bmake, except for bmake also has this extra stuff. I'm not that familiar with it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the differences are either.
So what version of make is being utilized in FreeBSD 10.x? I imagine there's a way to tell.
No, Alan's actually trying it right
no
now.
idea.
Right.
But I think FreeBSD 10 is bmake. I don't know if it has version numbers or not. Is the FreeBSD man page for make the current documentation for the merger being used? I think so. When did FreeBSD change? I don't know, but I think it was 10.x. But I think we also changed I think all currently supported versions are using bmake, and the last thing that was not was like FreeBSD 8.3 and 9.2. But I don't know, can we change the version to make in the middle of the release branch or not?
I wouldn't. I
remember the ports tree starting to rely on newer features of bmake at some point once the last release that didn't have it was deprecated or something.
Somewhere out there, some FreeBSD developers are probably watching this after we finish the show and will be telling us, like, no, you idiots, this is why we did it.
Right, and I think in particular, at some point, it just became a requirement to install bmake on the older ones to make it work. I don't actually know. When the change happened, I imagine you could find it by looking at just the history of the bin make or whatever, but
through the source.
Yeah. It says, is there a place where you can look at the change history for FreeBSD documentation? Yes, there's a complete SVN repository for docs as well, although if the changes for man pages, those will be in the source tree. But if you're looking, for example, that URL he found was a docs article, that'll be in the docs tree. If you go to svnweb.freebsd.org, there's a web way to browse through the repos for docs, ports, and source, and it has the complete history going back 20 some odd years. So you probably don't want to read it all.
Sure. All right, Alan, I'm going to let you read the next one because he mentioned you by name, so you get stuck with it.
So Al writes in about DigitalOcean and FreeBSD 10.2 and 10.3. He says, I'd just like to thank Alan for getting them into FreeBSD. I've been running a LAMP stack on CentOS droplets, running a number of small WordPress sites with 2 gigabytes of RAM, and I've been having issues with it that keeps running out of memory and having to tweak the Apache config. So I decided to set up FreeBSD with 512 megabytes of RAM droplet running Nginx and transfer all the WordPresses over to that. It was really easy to set up and handle the same amount of traffic, but with 1/4 the amount of RAM. As I set this up a couple of months ago, it was running FreeBSD 10.2, so now 10.3 is now supported by DigitalOcean. As I understand it, this is 10.2 is supported until December 31st, 2016, and yes, that's correct. So he's looking at a blog post on DigitalOcean on how to upgrade from 10.2 to 10.3. He says it all looks straightforward, but there's a section called Resolving Conflicts, and I wonder why you would need to do this. Is this normal for FreeBSD upgrade, or is it just DigitalOcean that created their own version of FreeBSD? So in particular, this is conflicts in config files. So when you're doing the upgrade, it takes what the config file looked like when it was shipped in FreeBSD 10.2 and what it looks like in 10.3, and creates a diff of that, and then tries to apply that diff to the difference between what it looked like in 10.2 and what was on your system. So, for example, if you change the messages of the day thing when you log in, that'll be different, and you'll have to resolve the conflict. Even the password file, maybe FreeBSD 10.3 adds a new user to the password file, but you've also added your users to the password file, and you just have to merge those two changes. The tooling in FreeBSD Update could be better for that, but in general, it's not that bad to go through, and yes, it's totally normal. I run into it all the time. It is one of the most annoying parts about the upgrade process, but
that's the part that takes the time.
It's not so bad, but it is, it can be daunting. But in general, I've upgraded a machine successfully over the years from FreeBSD 6.0 to 10.3 using FreeBSD Update remotely. Like, this is a machine I only had SSH2. I didn't even have a console like you do with DigitalOcean. So if I made a typo in one of those files while I was merging them, it might actually mean the machine doesn't come up properly, and then I'd be in big trouble. But I managed to do it without any problems the whole time.
See? So if Alan can do it, you should have no problem.
Yeah, and that's a physical machine with only 512 megs of RAM, which I really should stop paying for because it costs more than a DigitalOcean droplet with 2 gigs.
Holy man. Just the electricity costs, I'm sure.
This is
P3, P4?
It's like it's a Core 2 Duo era Celeron, I think.
Okay.
Something like that. It runs in a data center in Michigan and has handled my backup email for longer than I can remember.
Oh, there you go.
But anyway, yes.
Nice.
No, that's not really something specific to DigitalOcean, although DigitalOcean makes a couple of small changes so that there might be one or two more conflicts. But in general, it's a normal part of the upgrade process.
Okay. Well, thanks for running it now. We appreciate that. Okay, so we wrap up the show here, of course. We want to remind you, send questions, comments. If you have show ideas or topics or maybe stories, for example, I need to give a call out to Frank, who sends in so many links.
Yes,
it's awesome.
thank you
Keep
very
doing
much.
that. That's great. We appreciate that. Good stuff you find. So send those all into feedback@bsdnow.tv. Send everything there. Please don't, you can comment on the YouTube videos, whatever. Just, we're probably not going to see it. So if you want us to actually get eyeballs on something, send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv. We don't reply to everything that comes in. There's a lot of traffic there, which is fine, but we do go through that, and we'll try and get your questions into a future episode. So keep it coming, keep sending it in, and hopefully you'll get a mention here in the upcoming weeks.